With the ongoing war in Ukraine, violent and graphic images just about everywhere, it's a challenge to perfectly insulate the young ones at home from being exposed. Well, joining us with more on how to deal with these times is Beverly Hutchison, Executive Director at D. Norton Child Advocacy Center. It's great to have you back.
Thanks.
And you open up your computer, there it is. You watch TV, there it is. It's everywhere. So what would be some of your first tips on how to minimize the amount that these kids are seeing in terms of the war coverage?
Be aware of what they're seeing and when they're seeing it, how much time they're spending in front of the computer, in front of the TV. Too much is too much.
Yeah.
So set some boundaries in your home.
I mean, even for adults, it's hard to just be on a constant feeding of
Right.
you know, just kind of devouring all this information. So even for us, it gets exhausting.
It does, and that applies to adults too. You know,
Right.
so be aware of your own limits.
Yeah.
Because the place you want to be for your child is able to model open, calm communications. So if you're ingesting too much of this drama, of the trauma of what we're seeing coming out of the war in Ukraine, then you're probably going to need to process your feelings about that before you interact with your child.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
So where do you start the discussion exactly?
I think, you know, you can even start it with yourself. You know, I've been seeing a lot of this, the images about the war in Ukraine, and I wonder if you have, you know, and what are you seeing? And that begins to talk about getting an idea of what your child has seen and is hearing. Gives you an opportunity to gently correct any misinformation they have, and to open the door to talk about their feelings.
Right. And when you talk about feelings, to normalize those emotions. So what do you mean by that exactly?
To acknowledge they're there. You know, one of the things we know working at D. Norton and working in trauma is the importance of naming things and naming your emotions and validating that, yeah, I guess, you know, what makes you afraid when you hear that? What makes you anxious when you hear that? Let's talk about that. You know, we don't encourage parents to put aside the hard topics. Bring them out in the light.
Right.
And show that you can talk about them in a calm way, and then you can validate your child's feelings. You know, I know that must make you feel anxious, you know, and then you can begin to talk about what you do with those emotions. You know, what are some things you can do when you feel anxious? You know, when I feel anxious, I go for a run. You know, what do you do?
Yeah.
And if they don't have any ideas, suggest some.
Sure.
You know, let's limit. You know, let's not watch the news tonight.
Yeah.
Let's go for a walk as a family instead.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then encouraging questions. You know, it's so much easier to just sweep something under the rug, but actually do more damage when you do that.
Right.
So by inviting the conversation to take place, and then encouraging questions. So what would be a typical question that a child would ask is, I mean, they see themselves in those news reports. So there are children dying, and there are some very traumatic images. So how would you address some of those harder questions?
You know, I think you have to know your child, know where they are developmentally, and respond appropriately. So a young child may ask you, is this going to happen to me, Mommy?
Yeah.
Well, a young child wants to feel safe. So as a mom, as a dad, you could affirm, you know, it's my job to keep you safe.
Right.
And that might be enough for a young child. A teenager or preteen is, you know, they've had more life experience. So you're going to have to address the questions based on where your child is in developmental stages.
And then these two things kind of go hand in hand, is the misinformation and then also the consumption of social media. So if you're consuming this information through social media besides the television or wherever else, it's very difficult to know exactly what your kids are hearing. So would you open up the conversation yourself and bring it up instead of waiting for them to come to you and to say, well, you know, where are you getting your information? Or what are you seeing these days on social media?
It starts with listening to your child.
Yeah.
You know, if they're asking a question that seems a little off, where's that coming from? And then yes, I would encourage parents to take the initiative and open it up. And even if your child isn't come to you with questions, you know, maybe go ahead and say, you know, I'm hearing a lot about the war in Ukraine right now, and I find that images, disturbing, and it worries me. Are you seeing any of this? Where are you seeing it? We want to make sure that the information they have is accurate.
Yeah.
Because where children don't have information, they'll fill in.
Right.
And sometimes that's not the best source of information.
Would you recommend a parent to discourage their child from leaning on social media too much or at all?
I think depending on your child's
that
age, that's a real challenge.
Yeah.
I think you talk about it.
Yeah.
I think those are opportunities to discuss things. Maybe offer something you've seen on your own social media and say, what are you looking at? What do you see? And try and get them to share with you. Hey, Mom, I saw this on TikTok.
Yeah.
Is this true, or is this something somebody made up?
Yeah. And you're not just a spectator here, because then the next, I think, element to that conversation is, well, what can we do to make the world better?
Right.
And so there's various organizations, there's various causes in which you can get involved, get your child involved in a healthy way.
Absolutely.
That you feel like you're making a positive difference in the situation.
Yeah.
Beverly, you always have wonderful information. Thank you so much for joining us
Thank
today.
you.
We're back after this.